Welcome, and we are going to devote this lesson in the memory of Warren Davis, Judith's late husband, and may it be an elevation to his soul. And with that, we will start our lesson. I'm going to, with our bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Make sure you can see. There we are. You should be able to see the screen share at this point. So this is, we are starting in a way, a unique section of the Torah. And of course, a great deal of the Torah is going to be made up of these kinds of passages, which is halacha, which is law. And so we're learning about the very first mitzvah. So mitzvah is not only a good deed, it is beyond that. It is response to divine commandments. Right. So we are analyzing, given the fact that we're asked or told to love God with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our might, our activity, what we're doing in analyzing these statements that are in the Torah in the way that we're doing. And as you can tell from the page itself, we are only beginning that process, is an act of love. Paying attention on this kind of level, meditating, it says, you shall meditate on them day and night. It is not just pretty words. It is act. It is actually something that is done. And that's, we are attempting in our efforts here to do that. So the first mitzvah, of course, has to do with the Pesach, that is the Paschal lamb, that took place in Egypt, which was unique. Even though we celebrate Pesach every year subsequently, and the Torah is going to tell us to do that, nevertheless, the Pesach di Mitzrayim, the Pesach that was observed in the land of Egypt, was unique, and we are reading about those mitzvot that took place at that particular time. So here we are. Even though some of these mitzvahs actually do apply to subsequent psachim, as I suspect this particular mitzvah that we're going to look at, nevertheless, some of the things like putting the blood on the doorposts and things like that are unique. So we were just told that God, I believe, is instructing Moses and Aaron to speak to the Israelites and to give them these instructions. So we are reading about God's instructions to Moses and Aaron, and they were told to take a sel levet avot, to take a sheep for each, or a lamb for each family, and for each individual household. And as I said, we get right into what I would define as the hallmark of oral Torah, which is circumstances alter cases. And a circumstance starts with the word "and if," right? If you encounter this particular circumstance. Before I go on with that, I think it's very important to realize that part of this commandment, and I believe I've mentioned it already, is that the entire lamb is consumed that night, that it's very important that the lamb be consumed that night by the family. So we are reading here about a circumstance where here they've taken a lamb for the household, but there are not enough people in that household to consume the entire lamb. And that's the circumstance that the Torah is now going to deal with. V'yimat habayit miyot miseh. If the house is too small for an entire lamb, v'lakachu ushcheno, the householder should join his neighbor, hakarov elav, who is close to him, hakarov el beito, who is close to his house. He should go to his neighbor, okay, and they should take. In that case, they should designate, el beito b'michsat nefashot, according to the number of souls in those two households, right? They should take a lamb ish lefi ochlo. So again, we're defining and drilling down a little bit into some of the issues involved here. A man according to his consumption. In other words, according to how much a man will consume, will eat. Tachosu al haseh, you shall count towards the lamb. In other words, you need to make a calculation by the number of people there. This is the simple pshat of this verse, is you look at the number of people now between these two households and make sure that that is what's going to be sufficient to consume the entire lamb. The question, of course, is it just one household? Is the when the Torah is talking about a neighbor close to him? So these are questions that would come up. So if the two households aren't enough, can you go to a third household? And I would simply say, this is a guess, is that is permissible, that the Torah isn't limiting it to just two, because it's important that the entire lamb be eaten. That is an opinion. It's a postulate. It is not necessarily proven. At any rate, that is a question that might arise. Let's take a look at the Rashi now. See, all this is of course the Torah Tamima discussing the same issues. So, ve'im yimat habayit, if the house be or the household be too small to support a lamb, in other words, or to consume a lamb. So the Hebrew here is not simple. The syntax is not the simplest, at least that's my sense of it. And this is in a way demanding that Rashi try to explain it in simple terms. Ve'im yihiyu mu'atim, if there are too few of them, mihiyot miseh echad, to have one lamb, she'en yecholim leochlo, that because they cannot eat the entire lamb, eat it. V'yavo lidei notar, and this is the point, so that there will be leftovers. After they've done their act of consuming the lamb, they are going to be leftovers. Velakachu ushcheno, etc. That's why he and his neighbor, etc. Zehu mashma'o lefi pshuto. Rashi saying that this is its basic meaning, the simple, straightforward meaning of this sentence. But it doesn't end there, because remember, when you're loving God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, you are trying to extract any possible meanings that these sentences and these words might have. And so there is another meaning here, and it's also sort of based on the syntax here. Miyot miseh. So it sounds that mihiyot yihaya, right, was from the lamb being, right, something like that. The od yesh bo midrash. There's another interpretation, and this is a midrash now, lelamed, to teach us she'achar shenimnu alav, that because what they did is before they went and slaughtered the lamb, they would subscribe to that particular lamb. And this is nimnu alav, that after they were counted on that lamb, yecholim lihitma'et. So this is interesting, that if they decide to take another lamb, they can withdraw, ulimshoch yedehem, and withdraw their hands, hemenu, from that particular lamb, lehimanot al se'achar, to subscribe to acher, to subscribe to a different lamb. But, however, im ba'u limshoch yidehem, if they decide they want to withdraw their hands, literally withdraw from that particular lamb, ulehitma et miyot miseh, and to in other words, lehitma et means to be less from that lamb. So here we're taking lehitma et. Ma'at essentially means a little bit. So we're understanding here as saying reduce themselves from that particular lamb. Yitma'atu ba'od haseh. They have to do this. They have to do this process ba'od haseh as long as the lamb kayam is still in existence. Beheyoto. So they're taking that mihiyot, bechayim. In other words, he has to be alive. That lamb has to still be alive. They cannot withdraw. Once that lamb is slaughtered, they can no longer do this process. So understanding this verse as meaning to allow you to count for a different lamb, but only as long as that lamb is still living. Velo mishenishchat, and but not once it's been slaughtered. Wow. Look at the amount of creativity and thought going into this particular midrash and this is a midrash halacha, because we're talking about practice now. That this is a detail regarding this practice, but again, a circumstance. And this is such a beautiful illustration of the process that the Talmud goes through, the process of Jewish law and the amount of analysis, right? The way this is being analyzed, the sentence is being analyzed in order to come up with this particular circumstance and how to deal with it accurately. And this is all based on the actual wording of the sentence, the actual syntax of the sentence, because the basic law could have been stated in a much simpler way using much simpler Hebrew, which is another reason for pulling this midrash, this analysis that we just went through. He's giving you the reference in the Talmud. There's a tractate called Pesachim, and it's on page 89. Let me make sure. Yes, 89. B'michsat. Again, a word that is not so clear. By the way, there's a Hebrew word, I believe this is the same word, meches, which I think it means tax, and I believe it's spelled the same way. So it has to do with the calculation, right? The calculation, because that's how you work out a tax. It's a calculation often. So he says cheshbon, calculation. And he gives an example, right? In Leviticus chapter 27, that's the end of Leviticus, where they're talking about evaluations. And it says, it uses the same word, michsat ha'erkacha. He says the calculation or the amount of your estimation. Your estimation. Lefi ochlo. What does this have to come? According to his consumption, according to how he is able to consume, what he's able to consume. Hara'ui la'achila. When it says according to his consumption, it means fitting to be considered consumption of food. So when it says hara'ui, that which is fitting. Prat lechole. So this is to exclude that when you do that calculation, it's saying according to the number of souls there, but it's saying a number of souls, it's being understood as who can eat normally, who can eat a normal meal. Prat lechole, which is to exclude someone who is ill, v'zakein, and elderly, she'enam lecholim lechol kazayat, who are not in a position to eat an olive bulk of food, kazayat. A kazayat means a bulk of an olive, the amount of food that's the bulk of an average size olive, and it's considered the minimum amount you can eat to be satisfying on any kind of level. And so when you, for example, want to make a blessing over food, you have to eat at least a kazayat to be able to make the bracha. Otherwise, in a sense, it's called a bracha levatala, meaning a wasted bracha. So again, look at the analysis that we have gone through at this point. I think that is the Rashi. That is the Rashi for that particular sentence. I want to make sure. Oh, sorry. One more word. Tachosu. Again, a little bit of an unusual word, and it means titmanun, right? You shall count, you should subscribe. Are there any questions about the sentence before I move on to the next one? Okay, all right. Going on. Se elam tamim. So this describing now what kind of lamb you can take. It has to be perfect. In other words, unblemished. It has to be unblemished. Zachar. It needs to be a male. Ben shana, a yearling. Yelachem. It shall be to you. Min hakvasim. You can take it from the lambs, or min ha'izim, or from the goats. Tikachu, you shall take. So it's describing exactly how to try and perform this mitzvah in a way that is divinely ordained. And the idea of desiring to please God and to know all these details so that you can try to act in a way that is in total keeping with the divine will. And even though who knows if it's in total keeping, at least as best as you can. And to use our intelligence to take these words and be able to actually do them. And that's why we need the oral Torah so badly, to be able to take care of all these circumstances that tend to throw themselves in our way when we try to take something that's an ideal and put it into the world. Okay, so he perfect, tamim, Rashi, tamim, perfect, belomum, meaning without a blemish. Ben shana, what do we mean by a yearling, right? Kol shnato karui ben shana. That is to say, it has to be in the first year of its life. Okay, its entire first year is called a ben shana. Klomar, that is to say, to be clear about this, shenolad b'shana zo. That is to say that it was born in this particular year. So without Rashi saying this, we can infer that it's very important to know when the year begins. Because if the year begins in Tishrei or the year begins in Nisan, is going to make a difference in terms of whether the lamb is considered a yearling or not. Question.
So Elul is the New Year of cattle?
I believe it is. You have a better memory than I do.
Well, Tu B'Shvat is the New Year for trees.
Correct.
Rosh Hashanah is the New Year for years.
Mm-hmm.
I think Elul, first of Elul, is the New Year for cattle.
Okay.
But I don't know what sheep go under.
Well, sheep, right. So when they say cattle, do they mean oxen and cows and bulls, or are they also talking about small cattle as well, right? Small stock, small livestock. Rashi isn't explaining this here. Now, this might be something that Torah Tmima is going to get into. I can't say without having read Torah Tmima, but again, you can see, the issue that you just raised comes from having looked at this in the particular way in which we're looking at it. And there's something unique about that, right? But it's taking Torah and just totally not allowing it to be a lip service to get away with idealism alone and not trying to actually perform it. So, yeah. I cannot answer that question because I haven't studied enough, or I don't remember enough to be able to answer it. But clearly, if it was born before, if Elul is in fact the first of Elul is the beginning of the year, counting years for cattle, and we're including sheep and goats in that, then obviously if it was born before this year's Elul, we can't count it as a yearling anymore. So I'll go on a little bit more. Min hakvasim or min ha'izim. So it's telling us that it can either be a lamb or a kid, right? A goat. Or mizeh. So when it says umin ha'izim, from the lambs and from the goats, you might think it means you have to take one of each. Rashi is clarifying that. Certainly, the rabbis would want to clarify that. Or mizeh, or mizeh. It means either one or the other. She'af eis kruya seh, and the point here is that a kid, a goat, a baby goat, is also called a seh. Normally, we refer to seh as sheep, but the fact is that the Torah uses the word eis, kid, to also refer to a baby goat. Shneimar, and he gives your example. Again, he's reasonably rigorous, right? In Deuteronomy 14, it says, V'seh izim, right? A lamb of the goats. So the word seh cannot only mean a lamb. In other words, from sheep. Seh can mean either. Going on. V'haya lachem lemishmeret. So you see how we're moving slowly through this particular instruction and halacha. V'haya lachem lemishmeret, and it shall be to you under your watch, Ad arba'a asar, until the 14th day, lachodesh hazeh, of this month, v'shachatu oto kol kahal adat Yisrael, and the entire assembly of the community of Israel shall slaughter it, bein harbaim, in the evening. We'll translate it as that, but it doesn't necessarily mean evening as we understand evening. Essentially, it means from noon on. Okay, and to possibly more specific, perhaps 12:30, and we're talking about local time as far as that's concerned. In other words, sun time. So in other words, from noon when the sun is at its zenith and into the afternoon, basically it's half an hour afterwards, because half an hour after that noon, you can see how the sun is declining into the west. And that's the time we're talking about. And Rashi's going to go into that. Let's see quite a bit of Rashi here. V'haya lachem lemishmeret, and it shall be to you for guarding, right? Ze lashon bikur. He says that this mishmeret has the meaning of examination. In other words, over these 4 days, you're to continually examine this lamb or this kid. Sheta'un bikur, because it requires examination, mimum, to make sure that it isn't blemished, arba'a yamim kodem shchita, for the 4 days preceding its slaughter. Umipneima. So that begs another question that Rashi's going to ask, and maybe you would be asking it as well. Umipneima, and for what reason hikdim lekichato leshchitato? Was it necessary to take the lamb, all right, to designate it and take this lamb, arba'a yamim, 4 days before it's slaughtered? Ma shalot siva chen bepesach dorot, which was not part of the commandment of future observances of Pesach. Remember, I mentioned this at the beginning of the lesson. So this Pesach, assuming we even were able to bring a lamb, you don't have to bring it on the 10th day and then watch it for 4 days. You don't have to do that. So why Dafka, the Pesach of Mitzrayim, of Egypt, did one have to do this? Haya Rabbi Matya ben Cheresh Omer. So Rabbi Matya, son of Cheresh, would say, Hare hu Omer, behold, it states in Ezekiel chapter 16, Va'avor alayich, I passed over you, which of course is a reference to what happened in Egypt on the night of the slaying of the firstborn. God passed over the Jewish people, right? I passed over you for Erech, and I saw you, v'hine eitcha eight dodim. And it says, and behold, your time was a time of love. Love. So again, time of love. We're talking about love of God here. So how do we demonstrate our love of God? Here we go. Higia shvu'ah. Okay, so it's as if God is speaking. Higia shvu'ah, the time to perform the vow, right? To make good the vow. Shenishbati la Avraham, which I promised Abraham, which I vowed to Abraham, she'egal et banav, that I would redeem his children, his descendants. V'lo hayu b'yadam mitzvot, and should it be that they were not able to perform mitzvot, they didn't have the capability of performing commandments, the asek b'hem, to busy themselves, to occupy themselves in the performance of those mitzvot, kedei sheyig alu, in order that they should be redeemed. So, yeah, I mean, we do have a concept of divine grace, but at the same time, there's a very strong sense that we have the ability and the intelligence in order to actually earn our place in immortality, that it's not just a gimme. And here we're talking about the redemption from Egypt, and God wanted to give the Jewish people an opportunity to earn that rather than just have it as a giveaway. So here we go. Shene'emar, and it says, and how do we know this? And this is in the same location of the Ezekiel, in the Ezekiel passage. Ve'at arum ve'erya, and you are naked and exposed, meaning in the sense of naked of commandments, exposed in the sense that you don't deserve what's happening. V'natan lahem, and so God gave to them shtei mitzvot, two commandments. Dam Pesach, the blood involved in the slaughter of the Pesach offering, the dam milah, and the blood of the circumcision. Well, how do we know that? Shemalu be'oto halayla, because they were circumcised that night. In other words, whatever children, whatever males were not circumcised at that time, they were circumcised that night. Shene'emar, and how do we know this? Again, the same Ezekiel passage. Mitposeset b'damayach, wallowing in your blood. Bishnei damim. Okay, so damayach would be more than one. Okay, bishnei damim, in two bloods. V'omer, and it says not only that, it says in Zechariah 9, Gam at bedam britech, you too, in the blood of your circumcision, the blood of your covenant, shalachti asirayach, I set free, or I sent forth your imprisoned ones. Mibor, from the pit. So again, this is a reference to the Egyptian servitude. Mibor ein mayim bo, from a pit without any water, right? V'shahayu, so he says, because hayu shtufim ba'avodat kochavim, they were, this particular Egypt, referring to Egypt, who was covered in other words, they were completely immersed in the worship of stars, meaning idolatry. Amar lahem, he said to the Jewish people, God said to the Jewish people, Mishchu, withdraw, ukhu lachem, and take for yourselves. Mishchu yidechem, in other words, meaning this, Mishchu yidechem me'avodat kochavim, withdraw your hands from practicing idolatry, ukhu lachem tzon shel mitzvah, and take for yourselves the lamb of the commandment. And I'm going to stop here. Let's do that. Go. Forgive me. Okay, let's see what I can do here. Here we are. Just want to make sure I have the place for us tomorrow, God willing. And I would imagine you might have some comments to make. Right, let me mark this place. I'm going to stop the share. Any comments before we move on that you'd like for the record?
Yeah, I have a comment.
Sure.
How do I know when I eat turkey that it's a yearling and that it's purified? It's not blemished. How do I know that?
Well, you do on one level, because before it's shechted, they do examine it to see if it has any broken bones and things like that. So if you're eating a kosher turkey, having said that, you're not eating turkey as a holy act. You're not eating a sanctified turkey. And it's only because these were sacrifices, in other words, they were offered up to God, that they had to be perfect in the way that they were. So if you're eating turkey on Pesach, don't worry about it, especially if you're eating kosher turkey. You do not have anything to worry about as far as that's concerned. Okay.
Okay, another thing.
We no longer have sacrifices. Once the temple was destroyed, we could no longer practice all these kinds of practices. Okay. Fear not.
I was wondering, another thing is, on Pesach, I invite Gentile friends in also, but they're not circumcised. Maybe I did the sin. I made a sin. I'm really, I feel bad about that.
Okay. Again, you need to understand, this is not the Pesach in Egypt, nor is it the Pesach that would have been performed had we had a temple and had we been eating Pesach, the Paschal lamb. Okay, we are no longer doing that. We have to symbolize it, and so I don't believe. This is again my opinion, but I don't believe that you're acting in a hospitable way is somehow counterintuitive for what the whole purpose of Pesach is. There is a tractate. In fact, it's interesting. It actually is in the tractate that involves divorce. That is about how you do things, mipnei darchei shalom, to practice paths of peace. And that generally is a category that has to do with how you treat Gentiles. The other piece too, of course, is that I believe that Christians and Muslims for sure, and probably there are groups of people of other religions as well, share our belief in one divine creator. So, if we were in the temple, etc., we would have to do things differently on a whole bunch of levels. But I would not fear about the fact that you may be inviting some friends of yours who are Gentiles to come and celebrate Pesach with you. They're coming with a great deal of respect. And by the way, Gentiles too had an opportunity to bring offerings in the temple, to present offerings, provided there were different issues involved, but certainly they were doing it as an act of respect and worship of God, and we would not want to turn them away. So I will stop here. Yeah, I need to end.
One more question.
Okay.
When I've got my food, and I get rid of all the comics.
Yes.
Trying to get rid of all the comics.
Sure.
And what I do is I sell my food to a stranger, and the rabbi says, "Well, yeah, I'll be an intermediate for you, and I'll sell your food to a goy, and he'll own it." But meanwhile, I've got the food in my house. It's still comments. I don't know. I feel like I sinned again.
Well, here's the thing. It's a legal act, and you have to put the food away in a room that is under lock and key that you no longer own because you've rented it. The rabbi will rent that room of yours to the non-Jew as well, so that technically it's not yours, and you know that it's a terrible thing for a landlord to go into the home of the person he's renting the room to without their permission. So you no longer are the owner technically of that food, and it's been sold and conditionally sold, or let's say even outright sold, and the room itself also is rented to the non-Jewish person. Okay.
So when I'm done eating, I can't eat the food. I can't keep the turkey for tomorrow. I got to burn it. I got to get rid of it.
Again, Harlan, the turkey is not sanctified food. It does not have the status of the lamb. Okay, and in fact, you definitely don't want to treat it that way, because we don't want to act as if the temple wasn't destroyed. And part of our mourning is that we can no longer do these things. So you're asking a good question, but what you need to keep in mind is that that turkey is not the Paschal lamb. It doesn't represent the Paschal lamb. It is not. We have, remember, the shank bone that we don't eat anyway, and that represents and symbolizes the Paschal lamb. But whatever meat we eat that evening is not in place of the Paschal lamb. Okay? So it doesn't require the halachot, the various laws that were involved in the Paschal lamb. Okay? All right. For many other reasons as well. And with that, I'm going to end recording.